Hello and welcome back to Normal Islands Live. I'm Curtis Daly and I'm joined by the fantastic Kevin Logan. How are you, Kevin, today?
Well, I am fantastic, as you just enunciated, and I appreciate that enormously. I'm very well. How the devil are you, sir?
Oh, do you know what? You graced me with your presence and it's already made my day. That's all I can say. Uh,
Beautiful.
Thank you for joining me. Stories tonight. Labour drops Leveson to inquiry. Green Party co-leader caused a stir with a Biden tweet. And we look into the Democratic nominee favourite and Vice President Kamala Harris. Let's go to our first story. So, in 2011, the Leveson inquiry was initiated to investigate the practices of the British media after journalists at News of the World, owned by Rupert Murdoch, found to have hacked the mobile phone of murdered schoolgirl Millie Dowler. Led by Judge Sir Brian Leveson, the inquiry was tasked to look into the culture, practices and ethics of the press. The second phase was planned to investigate the relationship between journalists and the police. Now, Leveson has been on hold since 2018, but Jeremy Corbyn, who was leader of the Labour Party at the time, pledged to go ahead with the inquiry. It is now emerged that Labour has now dropped their commitment to pursue the second phase of the investigation. Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy has hinted that the second part of the Leveson inquiry, known as Leveson 2, is unlikely to proceed. Asked about the status of Leveson 2, which was put on hold by the Tories in 2018, Miss Nandy said, well, it's not something that we committed to in the manifesto. So, why have Labour seemingly ended their commitment to continue the inquiry? Well, this next paragraph is quite telling. The Sun and the Sunday Times backed Labour at this month's general election after News UK received private assurances that a Starmer-led government would not pursue Leveson 2 or introduce restrictions on press freedom. I understands. Lachlan Murdoch, the head of parent company News Corp, approved the endorsement after meeting with Sir Keir Starmer and his team. Kevin, I mean, surely this is none other than barefaced corruption and political bribery. I know we don't like to throw that term around, but in this case, surely it is.
It can't be seen in any other light, I don't think. It's a direct correlative function, right? He previously had supported the policy when he had seemingly some semblance of principle under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, as you pointed out. And now Keir Starmer has directly contacted with Lachlan Murdoch, the Nepo baby who now runs Rupert Murdoch's empire, directly given the concession that Leveson 2, which was going to look into the criminality and involvement with News International and other organisations with the British police, which I, for one, as a citizen, would love to see, because clearly criminality took place there and lots of people need to be held accountable for it. And in return for that, he got the approval and endorsement of News International, both the Times and the Sun, albeit mutedly so and at the last minute, but either way he got that endorsement. It's a one-for-one quid pro quo exchange, and one of the most corrupt, blatantly corrupt acts in recent sort of political history, and is the ultimate sign of what everyone, I think, on the left knew to be the case, but a lot of centrist melts denied, that he intends to govern on behalf of and for the rich and powerful.
Well, back when Corbyn was Labour leader, I mean, he was pretty clear on media reform. It's something that we obviously desperately need, and this is why we're doing what we're doing. But we don't have a free press. We have a billionaire-owned press. Now, even so-called liberal outlets such as The Guardian, overwhelmingly, our journalists are privately educated. They all know each other, and it's just a club. But many of the media were trying to say that Corbyn was Trumpian for attacking it, essentially saying that he doesn't like media accountability, he doesn't like scrutiny. But to compare Corbyn to Trump in that regard is mad. I mean, Trump and his supporters genuinely hate media scrutiny. I mean, everything is fake news unless these outlets support them. But Jeremy Corbyn wanted media reform, a more pluralistic and open media, not just billionaire owned. So if you ask me, being in cahoots with media barons, changing policy on the whims of billionaires, that's more Trumpian than anything Corbyn ever did. I mean, do you agree with that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. The idea that it's the pro-Leveson side that want to avoid scrutiny is absolutely ludicrous. Leveson itself was meant to be scrutiny of the media, and you can see from the way in which the independent, the IPSO, the IPSO, the replacement for the Press Complaints Commission, which has never been officially recognised, but is funded by all of the billionaires who own all of these newspapers, has been routinely criticised by both the National Union of Journalists and by independent non-governmental organisations as being essentially an incredibly corrupt and corrosive way of them avoiding their responsibility, which Leveson was supposed to bring forward, right? And so the political establishment, through the media and politicians, have essentially kneecapped Leveson and avoided any actual scrutiny of those in positions of power, i.e., billionaires. It's ludicrous that it's being portrayed as politicians trying to avoid scrutiny when it's actually the politicians and the journalists who have conspired to avoid scrutiny of all of them. Because I think the point you made there of it being a kind of boys' club where everyone knows each other is perfectly exemplified by the fact that the organ with which the interview was given by Lisa Nandy was in The House magazine, which is literally an in-house parliamentary rag, for want of a better word, where politicians talk to other politicians in other media figures and decide what the narrative is going to be. And once that's been decided, it's just gone along with by everybody. Both sides now agree Leveson and scrutiny of the press and criminality don't need to exist, even though we're told that law and order is really important, apparently, but not when it comes to the media.
I mean, that's a really good point you brought up there, because whenever people talk about the role of the media in society right now, you've got two issues here. One, like I call it the billionaire press, because you've got essentially a handful of people owning the means of communication, and then you've got the BBC, which isn't owned by billionaires, but it's a revolving door between the BBC and many figures in government, right? Yeah. And when you criticise that, when you say, I don't think this is actually a free press, again, what Jeremy Corbyn did, their response is to kind of say, well, you don't like media scrutiny. But you brought up a really good point. And the point is, the media and the politicians are on the same side. They're supposed to be on opposite sides. I understand you're going to have some sort of friendly rapport with some journalists, of course, but that's far away from what we have today, when you've got the same people going to the garden parties, you've got the New Statesman, you've got the Spectator. They're all in it together, really. And we want to kind of separate that so we can actually have proper media scrutiny. I also thought it was a really good point when you said about law and order. Keir Starmer is someone who's definitely tried to be more conservative on law and order, and when it comes to, I don't know, arresting Just Stop Oil activists, and I know that those policies came from the Tory government, but there's no sign of it slowing down. When it comes to crime, he's clamped down on that, but when it comes to actually powerful people in the media, he's not interested. So, I mean, surely we should call into doubt Keir Starmer's consistency here.
Oh, 100%, yeah. Exactly, yeah. He and his government, like you say, although they didn't institute the policy, are in support of the draconian as hell sentences that were handed down to people who talked about causing a public nuisance. That apparently is beyond the pale, whereas hacking the phone of a murdered child and giving false hope that that child might still be alive, apparently that doesn't need to even be looked into, let alone anyone be prosecuted for it. The double standard is grotesque. And again, if you just look at the basics of it, who are they going to be governing on behalf of? The mood music says so far, the rich and powerful. He's already said he's not going to tax the rich. He's now saying he's not even going to look into the malfeasance of the rich. It doesn't look good. And a further point from the interview with Nandy was that she meant or hinted about the privatization of the BBC as well, which isn't even being really reported as part of this story. But she mentioned that the government had stuck to their manifesto pledge of saying that the BBC charter will go until 2027, which it's due to, and then be either renewed or not. And then she's going to, quote, look at all of the options available with relevant stakeholders, which is essentially a privatization, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That's what's being done there. If they had no plans on privatizing it, you wouldn't need to say that. You'd say we'd look at ways of furthering the franchise. We'd look at ways of deepening the public institution of the BBC. But they don't say that. They say basically, we like with the NHS, we want closer ties with the private industry. That's what they want. It's privatization by the back door again.
Well, I mean, yeah, when I was reading the article about her comments on Leveson, she did talk about ownership. But the way she tried to frame it was like a closer tie between the public and the BBC. But we already have a publicly funded BBC. I mean, there's some reforms that could be made. But it's really worrying that Lisa Nandy, who was seen as the soft left, is not shooting that down. Now, what I find really interesting is that a lot of the centrist melts, as we like to call them, talk about how the Conservatives are corrupt, how they're scandalous, and actually now we have the grown-ups in charge. It's quiet now. It's all so quiet now that Labour are in power. And I've long said that just because it's the Labour Party, it doesn't mean they're any less scandalous. And this is an example of a scandal, right? We've seen examples of it before. We've seen when Keir Starmer has taken quite a bit of freebies, going to football matches and stuff, etc., etc., and then actually having the most freebies from every Labour government combined, Labour Party leader combined. One in terms of a tax, I think it was they were looking at taxing Google, then got a nice little freebie, was taken to an event, and then suddenly dropped that. These things are scandalous, which aren't reported in the media. Now, if it was the Conservative government, you would see it far more in the likes of The Guardian, The New Statesman. You would see it maybe even on the BBC, but because it's Keir Starmer, it's not. Why is that? Why are we suddenly excusing pretty poor behaviour when it's Sir Keir instead of Rishi Sunak?
Well, it's the sensibles. They're back in the room. The adults are back in the room. He's got the good vibes, whereas the Tories had lost the good vibes. And that's at least in part because of Liz Truss. What you've got to look at is who makes the media and what are their goals or what are their stimuli. And that is essentially their own self-interest to a certain extent. They were fine with the Tories being really, really corrupt for a decade. It wasn't until Liz Truss destroyed the economy and hurt their financial interests and indeed their connections in the Conservative Party, who are making themselves very, very unpopular and will lose governing power, that they all of a sudden switched, and now all of a sudden it's Keir Starmer who has the good vibes. And so his corruption can go completely unnoticed until he loses the vibes. And then the great noticing will happen again. And again, I'm less bothered by him going to the occasional football match, although that's still sort of corruption, but it's kind of petty corruption that I think we can basically handle. That's not the end of the world. It's like you say, going to an event with Google, then dropping the tax that Google had to pay. It's going to the meeting with Lachlan Murdoch, and then dropping a central pillar of what was supposed to be reform of the media. It's these levels, this corruption, which is really corrosive and toxic, from a government who pledged change, vote for change, and yet it's literally business as usual. Lachlan Murdoch was already in control of the Tory party before, and he's now in control of the Labour Party. So there's no change whatsoever. The same people are governing. The same people are governing the government, regardless of the party that's in power. So there's no change happening.
But that was kind of the pitch to a lot of people. Or maybe it was a pitch to the journos, the inside journos, which is that, okay, the policies might not change. And we knew that. When we looked at the policies that Labour have been talking about or offering, weren't very different from the Conservatives. But, as you said, the adults in the room, it's going to be a clean government, it's going to be a quiet government, and things are going to change. But even in terms of playing by the same rules, it's exactly the same. Yeah. We understand that they don't want to invest in the economy. They've got their fiscal rules. They won't scrap the 2-child benefit cap. The policies remain the same largely. I mean, even the NHS in terms of privatisation. But it was supposed to be the statesman in charge. It was supposed to be the adults back in the room, and they would have a far cleaner politics. And we're not seeing any of that. And yet I'm seeing silence from the big Labour supporters or the Labour loyalists or the Starmerites. I mean, surely even by their own consistency, they would be angry, but nothing.
No, well, because they've tied their colours to the mast. They have a financial vested interest. In the same way that Laura Koonsberg giggling along schoolgirlishly to David Cameron and Boris Johnson and all the rest of it, she was the Tory party's client journalist. In the very same way that James O'Brien and various of his ilk are the exact copy of that for Keir Starmer. These people cannot turn their backs on them because that's their bread and butter. In the same way that, I mean, we'll talk about American politics later, the same way that people who have attached themselves to Donald Trump can't realistically distance themselves at that point. They've got the stink on them. So there's no way they can go back. So they just have to go all in. They sink or swim with the boat there, you know? And that level of like lack of journalistic integrity runs throughout the system, unfortunately. And it's a shame because there are some very, very fine journalists in Britain who do incredibly good work. But unfortunately, they never get into a position of power because the editorial control is done by the same small group of incredibly shady, corrupt bastards.
Well, our media landscape is kind of like an aristocracy in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
They all literally know each other. Yeah,
absolutely. They're the same private school kids, whether they're in Parliament or whether they're in the editorial suite at the Daily Mail. It doesn't matter. They're all the same people. It's, you know, people, we talk about a free press. In theory, you and I have exactly the same free press as Lachlan Murdoch does. But realistically speaking, when one of them is a billionaire who's been handed the most powerful media organization on earth and other people are born with nothing, that isn't freedom, really. Freedoms in the abstract mean nothing. What about concrete, actual freedoms? When they control the point to the point where when Rupert Murdoch was in power, and I presume Lachlan probably runs a relatively similar thing, he literally has a monthly phone call with the Prime Minister. Regardless of party, he would have a monthly government meeting with the Prime Minister, at least by phone or possibly in person if he was in London, to basically dictate what the government's policies were going to be. Otherwise, his newspapers were going to ravage them. The King doesn't have that kind of power. But Rupert Murdoch / Lachlan Murdoch does have that power. And that's not a democracy. That's a joke.
And even though we're talking about mainly the press here, I mean, we're talking about the Sun. For me, actually, they're not even the biggest concern because a lot of people know they're pretty biased. A lot of people know they're sensationalist. To me, the biggest problem is the so-called sensible media or the mainstream media, because I don't particularly think the Sun and the Express are particularly the mainstream media. They're just sort of the angry press. But when we look at the BBC, when we look at the Telegraph, the New Statesman, the Guardian, it's a far more pervasive issue, and we kind of touched upon it, which is that you've got people who are privately educated. It's the same sorts of people. So if you compare the amount of people who are privately educated in the country, which is a minority, but then you look at the statistics in the media, majority of them are privately educated. And that means certain voices are filtered out and they kind of got their blinkers on, which is why I mean, my analysis here is that a lot of them aren't just batting for Keir Starmer because they know they're kind of being biased. I think they believe that there is an inherent good in establishment progressive figure like Keir Starmer, where they can attack the Conservatives because they've fallen out of favour with the establishment, look like they're for change, look like they're radical by backing someone like Keir Starmer, but they can't see beyond that. I don't know if you sort of want to add to that.
Yeah, exactly. I think the private school thing is the perfect example of the way in which they have an in-group preference. And again, that exists to a degree within everybody. I wish that the working class had such solidarity with one another. Unfortunately, they don't. But that's at least in part because of the media landscape we live in. But yeah, the private school kids, if you look at the way in which the revocation of the tax-exempt status for private schools, the one vaguely decent policy that Keir Starmer has ever actually put forward and stuck to, at least for now. Look at the disproportionate amount of press coverage that policy received compared to the number of people it will affect, which is minuscule. I mean, it's a fraction of the already tiny fraction that go to private schools who will be in any way actually affected by that, i.e. you have to pull their kids out of school, because it's literally just the people who are right on the cusp of that would be affected in any way, and most of them aren't, because if you were, you probably wouldn't be sending your kids to private school anyway, because that would be potentially financially dangerous. So we're talking about a tiny number of people affected, but because it affects private school kids, it got a massively disproportionate amount of press coverage. Whereas the non-removal of the two-child benefit cap, which leaves, was it 400,000 extra children in absolute poverty, affects a far larger proportion of the population, and indeed has a much larger economic impact, regardless of the morality of it and all the rest of it, and yet received scant regard. Or indeed Palestine, which when we were seeing 186,000 people murdered by Israel, barely touched at all during the election, because whose interests are the media acting in? Their own, and they're all private school kids. So they looked at the private school thing and not 100,000 dead people or hundreds of thousands of starving children, or people, literally nurses and doctors, not getting paid to the point where they have to use food banks. Again, would affect a much larger group of people, not focused on by the media, because it's not them being interested, not being affected by it. And you see it constantly. I think I brought up with Helena, a mutual friend of ours, last night, the Danny Finkelstein, member of the House of Lords, member of the media class, private school educated guy, literally saying to a young disaffected person in the Question Time audience, can you just tell me, why on earth would you be disaffected with this? Because he had no idea, because he doesn't live in that world. He's not privy to any of it. He's not affected by the pressures that normal people are. And unfortunately, that sums up so much of the media establishment. They aren't affected by it, so they don't care. They don't talk about it, and it's not an issue.
It's a very good point. It's very well put out. Very well put, sorry. That essentially the media talks about their own interests, their own constituent. And if you've got essentially majority of these people in a particular bubble, privately educated, then when politicians do talk about them, and I agree with you, the Labour policy on it wasn't even raising taxes on private schools, it was just ending a tax break, it was just making it more fair. And there was a lot of media attention on that because they are personally affected. But when it comes to working class people, when it comes to junior doctors, when it comes to austerity, these people aren't personally affected. So when they do talk about that, they're not even talking about it from a integrity. So there's no journalistic integrity to find out about these particular stories because it doesn't affect them. But also, a lot of people think that the mainstream media is biased either to the left or the right. But I mean, I don't think that's necessarily the case in general. I think they just have a pro-establishment bias, which is why you can see people in the BBC, people in the press, in the media swing between Labour and the Tories, but they're only swing to Labour, for example, if they're establishment friendly. And I think they've given up on the Tories. They know they were toast at the election, and I guess it's a way of keeping them relevant by not sticking with a dead horse. They're now with their man Keir Starmer. It makes them relevant, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, James O'Brien, don't want to pick on just one, but he is a particular example. Was previously a supporter of Boris Johnson for London Mayor, hated Keir Starmer, again, because he was anti-establishment. And then as soon as the adults were back in the room, he was a big Labour stan. That's it. It's institutionalists. It's people who want the status quo. And again, it's sort of class solidarity from their perspective. This is that they are the institution. They don't want change because they've benefited from the status quo. So why would they, it's turkeys voting for Christmas sort of thing.
And their amount of change they do want, though, is largely insignificant. But it's painted as quite radical.
Or it's like social change, which is good, don't get me wrong.
It is good, but it doesn't particularly change
class reductionist about this.
Yeah, but it doesn't change their standing, does it?
No, exactly. Look, David Cameron introduced gay marriage. We had gay civil partnerships and stuff for a long time, but gay marriage was passed by a Conservative who killed 400,000 people with austerity, or 300,000 people with austerity. So the fact that he's, was slightly nicer to the gays is basically irrelevant to the point that he was an absolute ghoul.
Very well put. And yes, David Cameron is an absolute ghoul. And I like the fact that you do pick up on James O'Brien, because he's not my favourite guy. I think he's a detriment to journalism. He's also incredibly arrogant as well. I wish he was a bit more humble. But we are going to move on to our second story. Green Party co-leader Carla caused a bit of a unrest, shall I say, with her warm words for outgoing President Joe Biden on Twitter. I wish President Biden well and thank him for his many years of public service. This cannot have been an easy decision for him, but to take a decision that is personally difficult, but that is in the public interest, is a true sign of leadership. And this has prompted criticisms from many on the left, including Owen Jones. Joe Biden has armed and facilitated the mass slaughter of innocent people. I hope the Green Party co-leader reconsiders this tone-deaf statement, retracts it, and agrees to meet with British Palestinians whose relatives have been butchered with US bombs. But in response, Owen Jones was criticised from many centrists and many pundits, essentially calling him unreasonable, that Carla's tweet was respectful, and they made out that the left are unhinged, that it was a respectful tweet showing that they are a serious party and the pesky left are engaging in hyperbole. Now, Carla has come out and addressed this, to the praise of Owen, by the way, seeking to clarify her position. For decades, successive US governments have supported the Israeli government's illegal occupation of Palestinian land, and Biden is complicit in the slaughter of innocent people in Gaza. Last night, I was positive about President Biden's decision to stand aside as a candidate. Some people read into this that I was offering my unmitigated support for his presidency, including the policy of selling arms to Israel. Given my long-running work campaigning for peace, this is the last thing I wanted and certainly not my position. I am sorry for not making it clearer and that my comments left some in doubt and concerned. The next president needs to work for peace, stop arms sales to Israel, and ensure an immediate ceasefire and release of all hostages. The world needs the next US president to be a peacemaker. Now, I thought that was a pretty good response. Again, Owen Jones has said this is pretty good too. But what Carla said originally, I do think was pretty tone deaf. I agree with Owen here, yet the centrists piled on him. Kevin, what are your thoughts? Before we get to Carla's clarification, did her initial tweet warrant these criticisms from the left? I mean, do you think they went a bit too far? Or, do you think it was fair enough? And also, what do you make of Owen being dunked by the centrists?
Yeah. Well, in terms of whether things went too far, it's the internet. There's always going to be some people, regardless of left, right, centre or anything, there are going to be some people who go too far with it. Unfortunately, anonymity allows for the worst of humanity to come forth, and that's a shame. But by and large, if we ignore the outliers there, I think actually the criticisms were pretty warranted. I think it was tone deaf. I think it was unnecessary because, people making the point about it being diplomatic. Well, she's not a diplomat. She's not the Home Secretary. She's not the shadow Home Secretary. She's not the leader of a major political party who are going to have to deal with the American government particularly. So she could have just not said anything. But she decided to step outside of that realm and do a slightly tone deaf and silly thing, really. I was a bit disappointed with. Again, I don't think it's going to affect my voting for them going forward or anything like that, but it's still, it's not nice. I hope this isn't the start of them being sucked into the Westminster thing of everyone pretending they have to be really important or they're the main player type deal, which unfortunately
I think that might be the worry there, though.
Yeah.
So I'm on the same page as you. I think some people probably went a bit too fast, and I can't vote for the Greens now. I don't think that should change your vote in any way because at the end of the day, the policies are what matter. Yeah. But it was still a yellow flag because, yes, it was tone deaf, but also to echo what you're saying, I'm thinking, have they maybe been engulfed in the Westminster charade? Yeah. And because unfortunately, power corrupts, and I'm not saying that Carla's corrupt here or anything, and I'm not saying this is a horrendous tweet, but that's where it starts, isn't it? There's a lot of people that go into politics who I think genuinely want to make a positive change, but as they get engulfed in the Westminster bubble, it starts to change. That's where my fears lie.
I think that's a perfectly justified fear. It's certainly a thing that's happened to, like you say, many decent people are winning with honourable intentions who get suckered into it. What I would say is give them some time because being overawed by this incredibly new experience, which it's new for all of the Green MPs. None of them have been an MP before, of course, with Caroline Lucas stepping down in Brighton. So all 5 of them are brand new. Give them a little bit of time to bed in, and hopefully they'll begin to see the falseness of that bubble and begin to sort of overcome it in a way that I think some of the great parliamentarians of our age have. And I juxtaposed with you in DMs, Diane Abbott, who's been there since 1983, before either of us were alive, who did the right thing in saying, yay, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump, that was cool, but also he's going to be remembered for Gaza. A perfectly justified and measured response, which doesn't ignore the situation in Gaza and his complicity in the genocide that's taking place there. And Carla would do well, I think, to maybe look to her as a model to sort of build off in terms of their parliamentary antics. Although, of course, that will mean that they're never going to be welcome in the Labour Party. But, you know, that's part of the reason that I think a lot of people like the Green Party is because they're not welcome in the Labour Party. Yeah, so I think it was poor, but she showed good, I think, inclinations in coming forward with a perfectly measured response to that, which outlined, her reasoning. And I hope this doesn't. One thing I do hope is that she doesn't become timid in her approach to talking about things for fear of criticism, because that's potentially another way in which a person gets beaten down by the system, because you're going to get criticism regardless. If she'd come out and said, F Joe Biden, lol, see you later, Rip Bozo, she'd have been criticised for being unparliamentary by the same people who were clapping on Victoria Adkins, shouting at the dispatch box and, banging on the thing. And being, who, by the way, is not receiving any rebuke whatsoever. No official action will be taken against her for that unparliamentary conduct, which again goes to show you how ridiculous and institutionalized the whole thing is. But regardless of that, I hope she doesn't get sort of worn down by that, either by the left or by the right, and she comes forward and is forthright as she has been. And that's part of the reason that I felt that the initial response or the initial tweet from her was bad, is because I didn't expect that kind of thing from her. I expected her to be a bit more based about it. And again, she didn't need to make the comment at all. If she hadn't responded, no one would have criticised her for not mentioning it.
Well, my next question was going to be, did you think a clarification was good? And I think you've pretty much answered that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, I think Owen Jones was right to call that out as well. There's nothing wrong with that. We're not the sycophantic D riders that you get with Keir Starmer or Boris Johnson or whoever. People need to be critiqued. People need to have their feet held to the fire, not only as leaders within the left, but as a member of parliament. We are her employer. She is there to serve us. And if we don't feel she's doing so appropriately, I think it's perfectly fine to criticize that. But she came out and did the right thing afterwards. Mistakes aren't the problem. It's how you react to them. And I think she showed a deal of character and good grace in responding the way she did, rather than either ignoring it, which some politicians would do, or getting defensive, which is a perfectly natural response, but of course not a particularly adult or a worthwhile one.
I mean, to be fair, when I looked at the responses, they weren't even really that bad. Most people were saying, this feels ill-advised and tone-deaf. I mean, there are outriders, of course, who will say, I think things are over the top. And most of the people are like, this is a bit disappointing. And that was it. But what I found, and I really want to get your response on this, what I found really interesting is the reaction to those who criticize Carla initially. They're saying, well, this is the Corbynistas swarming to the Green Party. This is the left, and Carla's trying to be sensible and diplomatic, and it's the unhinged hard lefts going after Carla. And obviously they lumped Owen Jones in there. And then when she came with her clarification, which I thought is good, you thought is good, Owen even thought it was good, they're almost trying to say, wow, the hard left bullied Carla into changing her sort of position on it. I want to get your response to the centrist saying that, especially when you kind of said before that a lot of Starmerites don't like to criticize their leader. But, I mean, this is a good thing. The left is criticizing their own leaders.
Yeah, this is democracy. Like this, part of the problem that centrists have is that they believe that democracy begins and ends by putting your X in a box once every 4 or 5 years. And that's ridiculous. Of course, democracy is a constant and ongoing process, and you should be engaged civically as much as you can or are, willing to, and all the rest of it. The centrist melts, as previously described, need to try and portray the left as rabid, evil, anti-Semitic, violent lunatics. And so they will take relatively sensible statements like, I think this was, a misplaced argument, or, rare Carla, Al, something like that, and try and spin it into, see, the left, they're eating their own. So even mild critique gets put down as, too much, which I think shows a lot about the Starmerite / centre left, centre right kind of shitlib mentality. That they see any critique whatsoever of their side as being some evil thing that needs to be admonished, which is ridiculous. And when we talk about factionalism or purity spiraling, look at the way in which the Labour Party has purged entirely the left of that party. I mean, the state opening of Parliament was so disgusting to see these Labour Party freaks pouring love on the mother of the house, Diane Abbott, even though they literally tried to get rid of her. They had to be bullied into even accepting her as a Labour Party candidate at that election. These people are some of the most rabid ideologues.
Are you suggesting they're projecting and that actually it's more of a confession? The left were the purists. We couldn't take any sort of delineation from our hard left political program, even though in the Labour Party manifestos of 2017, 2019, we renewed Trident. That was in there, all about committing to 2% defence spending. A lot of the left may have had something to say about that, but we compromised on it. And yet, right now, the Labour Party, they completely kicked out the left of the party. Any criticism toward Keir Starmer is you're a Tory enabler. And now we can't even criticise our own leaders after we were told to piss off at the party, and we did that, and they seem to have a problem with it. I mean, I think to touch upon what you said, they have to make it out that the left are these crazy cranks, and I think they do that is because they need to deflect from their own politics, because they don't really have any politics, and their policy positions are actually quite extreme. But in order to try not to shine light on their really bad policy positions, it's to make another political faction look really, really bad, because they don't want to talk about policy. Because when we do talk about policy, it doesn't look very good for them. Like the two-job benefit cap, for example.
Exactly, yeah. These are some of the most sort of rabid ideologues who are convinced that they are post-ideology. They are convinced that they are that they're not ideological. They're just correct. And it's some of the most fart-huffing self-aggrandizement you will ever see.
I'm thinking of James O'Brien again, though, when you say that.
Exactly. It is. It literally is.
Correct. I mean, literally had a book saying how to be right.
Yeah. Oh, God. It's so pathetic. Well, him literally describing himself as part of the sensibles. I mean, I didn't realize that masturbation was allowed on the radio, but apparently it is.
It is if you're centrist.
Well, indeed, yes. These people are convinced they're just correct because they've got the orthodox opinion. They've got the opinion that the establishment and the institutions want them to have. And so anyone who deviates even slightly from that is a crazy crank. And to see these people sort of really poorly attempting to love bomb Carla when they would obviously despise her normally, and I think the feeling is relatively mutual, is really sad to see, because it's going to be so ineffective in the long run. And we're literally already seeing that you mentioned earlier, don't we just love the peace and quiet? Like, I'm sorry, lads, when you start doing blitzes on illegal immigrants and still funding and arming Israel, the goodwill is going to dissipate very quickly with the British public, and you're going to find yourself in a lot of trouble. And again, I think Jeremy Corbyn was right to call it the loveless majority. Also, loveless landslide was the phrase he used. Keir Starmer got 500,000 fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn did in 2019, the supposed worst election result ever. And he got 500,000, 500,000 more votes than Keir Starmer did, which goes to show you how ridiculous the first past the post system is, but also how the goodwill of the British people wasn't really with him. It was just an anti-Tory thing. But he's going to institute the same policies, so he's going to get the same outcome.
I mean, I think that Keir Starmer's days are probably numbered, and the reason why I think is because people will become disillusioned, and the media is going to have to keep themselves relevant, and I don't think they're going to stick to Keir Starmer, but also people behind him. I mean, I think there's people like Wes Streeting and Rachel Reeves who are far worse. I think they're going to be there waiting in the sidelines if Keir Starmer does become, or his position becomes untenable. But
yeah, I think Reeves is being set up as the next in line, the next cab off the rank. Yeah. Because to be honest with you, I don't think Labour together thought they were going to be able to turn it around. And mathematically speaking, it was unlikely that you're going to turn around an 80 majority or 90 majority, even with the fact that it had been reduced by elections and stuff in one electoral cycle. So I don't think Keir Starmer was going to be the person. He was supposed to be the sort of Kinnock to Reeves's Blair.
Well, I think,
Reeves
I think he was the transitional
person,
and I think that, which is very smart because, I mean, they planned his leadership back in 2018.
Yeah.
That's a year before the election, by the way. So if you're planning a leadership election before you have a general election just a year later, you're not serious about winning that general election. But I guess they wanted to make him the Kinnock rather than go for full Blairite. But it turns out that Keir Starmer is basically full Blairite. His policies seem to be the case anyway. But before we move on to our last story, I'd like to get to some of our comments, actually. Let's see what viewers have been saying. Stephen Calder, it's refreshing to hear a left progressive analysis of important political issues. Excellent work from Curtis and Kevin. Particularly disappointed by Navarra and Michael Walker tonight, so you cheered me up. I mean, I didn't catch Navarra tonight, planning for this show. I mean, I don't know, Kevin, if you did as well, but if you didn't, Stephen, let me know what was said. I mean, do you know what was said tonight? I mean,
I don't know. That sounds interesting. That would be very disappointing if they have said anything weird about that. We'll wait and see. I don't know.
I mean, look, I think Navarra. I mean, I've always been a big supporter of Navarra. I know some people that watch this channel don't particularly like them. I think overall they're pretty good, though. I mean, some people say that Michael Walker's a centrist. I'd be very interested in for people who are watching who think he's a centrist. I mean, I think he's a social democrat, and he's never said he's an anti-capitalist. I think he's quite consistent with his politics. It's not radical enough for me.
Well, exactly. And I think that's the thing, right? A lot of people for whom he wouldn't be left wing enough would say, well, he's this or that or the other. But you've got to bear in mind, what is the overall picture of British politics? It's not where we want it to be. The Overton window is far to the right of where it ought to be and where it historically has been. But either way, it is where it is. And so that puts him firmly on the left of centre ground.
And someone who is an anti-capitalist, I think there is space for people like Michael. He's very good at making his arguments. I think he's very good at pushing policies that we all support, whether you're a socialist or a social democrat, public ownership. These things are very important. Again, he's not as radical as maybe I would like him to be, but I think that's okay. I think that's absolutely fine. But I don't want to get bogged down with Navarra. But we'll go to more of our comments. Paul Smith. I'm not surprised that Leveson has been dropped. However, I'm so disappointed it has, though. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm surprised it's come out this early. I mean, I suppose if you're telling your billionaire backers, please endorse us and don't worry, we'll drop Leveson too. They were probably thinking, when are you going to announce this? When are you going to say this? They probably thought 2 weeks into a government was too long for them to wait. But I was quite surprised this has suddenly come out. I'm not surprised it's happened, but right now, I mean, Kevin, are you at all surprised at the timing of this?
Not really, no. I think they probably wanted to get it out of the way during the King's Speech debates because they're obviously going to win that, and this is not a bad time to bury an unfortunate story. Whereas if they go into the summer break and announce it when it's a much more quieter news day, people might scrutinise it a lot more.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah. Let's get some more comments. Nick Janzak, it would have been better if Carla Denyer just kept her mouth shut instead of doing wanky statesmanship. Plenty of genocide apologists are going to commiserate with Biden. I mean, I think I don't understand why she said anything for sure, because she's not a diplomat. She's not prime minister. She wasn't going over there. She didn't need to say anything really. Although I wouldn't say she should keep her mouth shut.
Well, I'm gonna practice my liberal lines for the Kamala Harris run for presidency and just say, oh, what? So a powerful woman's too much for you? You want her to be silenced, you misogynist?
Yes, I mean we've got women in politics, and now you don't
slay,
want to speak.
Queen, slay.
Satnav, interconnecting markets between the billionaires, a whole subsection of finance dedicated to the protectionism of those people. Kevin, you want to jump on that?
Sorry, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't listening. Apologies. Interconnected markets between billionaires, a whole subsection of finance dedicated to protectionism. Oh yeah, they want socialism for themselves and capitalism for everybody else. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, it's like when in 2008, the response to that was, please bail us out. But any
exactly.
social security programs, I mean, this is more pervasive in America as well. But any
Yeah.
social security programs, well, that's socialism. Yeah, cool. I mean, you guys get socialism. What's such a bad
Yeah,
thing?
they get bailed out every time. But if you're a steel worker in Wales, you're shit out of luck.
Thai Pizza Lord. I guarantee a plasterer from Southwest does not care about Gaza, but cares a lot more about Trump's unaliving. Well, I would disagree with you, because when we saw the election, we saw a lot of people who cared about Gaza. I mean, a particular MP or former MP I'm thinking of right now, John Ashworth, who has serially spent the last 2 weeks crying on TV for losing a democratic election in Leicester. I don't think he would have lost if Gaza wasn't important. Thangan Debonair, I mean, she probably lost a seat from November when she abstained on a ceasefire. And I don't think that's the only reason why people voted Green, by the way. But to say that the average person doesn't care about Gaza,
well,
I think they do.
There were 6, I think, largely pro-Gaza independents who won. Now, obviously, Gaza wasn't the only issue. There's a lot of disaffection and people, throwing their vote away on a candidate they probably didn't even think was going to win or whatever. But regardless of that, they wanted to put the point out there, put Gaza on the agenda, and 6 of them got elected. So that's one more MP than Reform has. And look at the disproportionate way in which Reform are being talked about as this massive political movement, but Gaza's being totally ignored, even though there were more. Like, I mean, I made the joke that Palestine won more seats than Nigel Farage did in the election. So, in terms of it being a thing that no one cares about, I don't think that's necessarily true at all. I don't think for many people it's like the number one issue, but it's a big enough issue that tens of thousands of people change their votes. That's not nothing.
But it's not an either or, though, is it? You don't just have to care about your material conditions or Gaza.
Yeah.
You can care about both. I mean, think about the amount of people that marched against the Labour Party in Iraq. I mean, a million people march. You don't think the average person doesn't care? They truly do care. So I think I think you're wrong there, my friend. Sarah Jessica Farter, a fantastic name, by the way. You I have no words to say, but we salute you. Wanky statesmanship is a good phrase for it. I even saw figures within the Scottish independent movement, not politicians, but intellectual figures, tweeting like that about Biden. Pathetic. Yeah, I mean, I think it is fair to say it's a pathetic tweet. Again, it does worry me a little bit that, like, will Carla or the Green Party become more wanky statesmanship kind of people? I don't know. It remains to be seen. But it is also possible that she's been in Parliament for 2 weeks. You might not be brave enough or whatever. But she clarified pretty quickly. I mean, a lot of people might not do that.
Also, let's not read too much into it. It's one tweet. We've all fired off a silly tweet without thinking about it. Now, usually mine is like a dick joke rather than a big political statement. But either way, we've all done, we've all said something a little bit silly. And she instantly clarified after some pushback. That's the way democracy should work. If a politician does something you don't like, you criticize them, they react well. Okay, good. I'm happy to deal with that. That's fine.
And don't worry, here on Turn Left, if they do something bad or they don't support a good policy, we will cover it. We will certainly cover it. Now, I want to say thank you to those who have been watching us so far, both on Twitter and YouTube. If you like what we do, you can subscribe and share our content. We have multiple people working for Turn Left. However, it is all still voluntary. In order for us to dedicate more time to Turn Left, we want to upgrade the quality. We want to become a fully realised media organisation. To do that, you can support us. You can support us financially on Patreon for £3 or £5 per month, or any one-off donation. Coughing here. At patreon.com/turnleftmedia. Let's grow a socialist media alternative to take on the establishment commentariat. Be a part of the journey, because we have just begun. Now on to our final story of the night, and going across the water. After Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential race, he endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris, as with many other Democratic figures. Now, Kamala will most likely be the Democratic nominee and the one to fight Donald Trump at the election. But how much do we know about her? I think it's safe to say that Kamala will certainly be better than Trump or any GOP candidate, especially with the looming threat of Project 2025. However, Kamala is far from a progressive. Before she was vice president, Harris was attorney general. Now, her record suggests she is pretty authoritarian in nature. This is Kamala Harris keeping people in prison after they were found to be innocent. Daniel Larson was in a California prison serving a life sentence when he received the news he had waited more than a decade. A federal court in Los Angeles had thrown out his conviction for carrying a concealed knife. 2 judges concluded that jurors who convicted Larson would never have found him guilty, and had they heard from additional witnesses who saw a different man with the knife. But 2 years after, he was supposed to be released. Larson remains behind bars while the California Attorney General appeals the decision. The state's main argument: he did not file his legal paperwork seeking release on time. Kamala Harris, whose office maintains that evidence still points to Larson's guilt, accuses him and his attorneys of filing a petition seeking his release more than 6 years after he was legally required to do so. Prosecutors question whether the judges had the authority to hear Larson's petition for release. And of course, this is an old article, so he's no longer in jail, but at the time, it seems like she wanted to keep him in here. Now, she's also very pro-Israel, doing a speech at AIPAC saying that Israel should get unconditional military support. She also criticised Obama for abstaining on a resolution condemning Israel. Harris has only been on the national stage since 2017. But the stances she has taken in her 3 years as senator place her rather squarely in the traditional pro-Israel camp of her party. The first resolution she co-sponsored as a senator was one effectively condemning the Obama-Biden administration's decision to abstain on a UN Security Council resolution condemning Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Now, Harris also signed a letter attacking the ICC. US Vice President Kamala Harris signed a letter when she was a senator last year stating that the US should stand in full force against the International Criminal Court's decision to probe Israel for war crimes. The letter was sent last May to then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, urging him to stand in full force against any biased investigation of Israel by the ICC. Again, these are all historical articles. Kamala Harris also said that Israel adheres to human rights. Asked in 2019 by the New York Times whether Israel meets international standards of human rights, Harris responded, overall, yes, while adding, I think Israel as a country is dedicated to being a democracy and is one of our closest friends in that region, and that we should understand the shared values and priorities that we have as a democracy and conduct foreign policy in a way that's consistent with understanding the alignment between the American people and the people of Israel. Now, nothing screams democratic values than an apartheid state. I mean, Kevin, it seems that the discussion around Harris is based on memes. The attacks from her opponents is that she laughs too much and is woke. That she had a meeting with visually impaired and blind people, and she said, I'm Kamala Harris, I'm wearing a blue suit. And you've got people on Fox News attacking her. But the real issue is right here. Her actual policies. Yeah. I mean, do you think that more liberals, do you think people are overlooking her record, possibly because they are so desperate for Trump to lose?
I think so. And I think it's sort of understandable in a sense, because all of this has to be predicated on the background of, as bad as she is, and there are some appalling things from her past, and indeed appalling things that I'm sure she'll have as policies going forward. It's about defeating Donald Trump. I mean, literally, if it weren't for that, then Biden would have just been allowed to carry on because, again, they're institutionalists, the Democratic Party, and so they'd have just stuck with Joe Biden because of seniority. That's the way it goes. But obviously, he was counterproductive to the end of winning the election. He wasn't going to win, so he's been removed. I do hope, by the way, someone has informed him that he's not standing anymore because he doesn't seem to be aware of a great deal. God bless him. Anyway, yes, so if she can defeat Donald Trump, that will be a worthwhile thing in of itself, because as bad as she is on a lot of things, she's clearly a damn sight better, or at least less appalling than Donald Trump. You mentioned the crime and punishment. She has been authoritarian when she was prosecutor in San Francisco, firstly, and then as the Attorney General for the state of California. She has supported some of the more draconian elements of the Biden plan. And of course, you mentioned the Israel thing, all of which Donald Trump is way worse on. We know, for instance, with Israel, that she called for a pause in fighting long before Joe Biden did, which again, would that actually translate into a great deal? Probably not, but I think is important and worthwhile nonetheless. I think if you compare that to Donald Trump's policy, which is being run by Sheldon Adelson's widow, who's this multi-billionaire-esque piece of garbage, who has literally, apparently, behind the scenes, in order to give millions and millions of dollars to Donald Trump, has gotten out of him the concession that Israel will be allowed to occupy the entirety of the West Bank, which is an appalling outcome. So for the love of God, as bad as she is, we have to hope that she actually wins. Such is the parlous and pathetic state of American politics, unfortunately.
And I think for balance as well, I mean, she has quite a mixed record. So there are the things I pointed out there are alarming, but there are also other things she has done which has improved or reformed the policing system and prison system. She has improved conditions for prisoners. She's certainly done quite a lot of work on racism within our systems. So it's a mixed record, but I think,
and she has economically. I think we looked at one of the things she did with No Justice yesterday, and there was a case of banks that had been defrauding people in California, and she pulled California out of a multiple state lawsuit because they were only going to get $4 billion in recompense from the banks for these people, and she managed to get $18 billion. So her actions directly led to $14 billion worth of more money garnered from these banks to the victims of, I mean, I think it was fraudulent payments on mortgages or something like that. So she has some based elements to her past as well. Now, that doesn't mean that she's good. And as leftists, I think it's perfectly fine to point out that she's got some appalling things in her past and still realize that the pragmatic thing to do would be to vote for her if you're in a state where it matters. If you're not, then I don't care. Look, if you're in California and you think, well, she's a piece of shit, you don't really have to vote for her because she's going to win California by a million miles. So I'm not saying that everyone has to go and do X, Y, and Z. But if you're in a state where it matters, I think it's important to defeat Donald Trump and, more importantly, to defeat Project 2025, which if you haven't looked into, please go and look into. It's essentially Christian fascism. It's a plan to do Christian fascism. And as much as Donald Trump has tried to distance himself, at least publicly, from that, he's picked J.D. Vance as his vice presidential running race, who has given his absolute tacit, overt support to Project 2025. So be under no illusions, that is going to be the plan for Donald Trump's second term. And that should be terrifying, not just for America, but of course, America is the hegemon. And so, especially as we in Britain, as the little poodle, what America does really affects us enormously. And if they go Christo-fash, we're fucked as well.
I think we have to understand as well, we're lucky, right? We have a parliamentary system, whereas they have a presidential system. We can vote third party. And I think when you look at the context over here, in the last election, you did have the Conservative Party who were toast. They weren't going to win. And the Labour Party who were pretty much identical on social and economic policy. Couple that with the fact that we have a parliamentary system. I mean, I voted Green. A lot of people voted Green or Independent. And guess what? We still have a huge Labour majority, but we have 5 independents, we have 4 Green MPs. We've helped shape politics in a positive way by not voting for the main opposition. They don't have that luxury there in America. It is literally because they have the electoral college system as well. They
Which
don't
is
have one person, one vote.
Like, if you think the first past the post system is bad, the electoral college system is
Exactly.
it's appalling. It's like an inbuilt 40-seat majority for a Conservative, which you have to overcome before you can then even build your own thing. It's ridiculous. And the fact that each state has 2 senators, when you've got like California, a state with 30 million people in it, 2 senators. Wyoming, a state with like 4 people in it, 2 senators. Ridiculous. Absolute nonsense system.
And also, like over here, if a particular seat went the way we didn't want it to, it'll be, okay, it's just that seat. But in America, if a state goes a particular way, it's not just one state. Certain states carry a certain amount of electoral votes. Certain states are far more important than other states. their voting system is so undemocratic. So again, if my personal analysis is, it is imperative to support any democratic candidate, because even the promise of things staying the same, that is far better than what's coming. I mean, Project 2025 is quite literally the end of liberal democracy. I know the US has a democratic deficit, of course. No, I'm saying it's a wonderful democracy, but it would quite literally outlaw democracy.
Yeah. And as bad as you might think liberal democracy is, and I have my critiques, I'm sure we all do as leftists, it's a damn sight better than the fascism that they have coming down the pipeline if Trump gets in. And by the way, just to clarify for someone who'd be in my chat, when I say don't vote for in California if you don't want to, I'm not suggesting don't vote at all. Because the important thing isn't just the presidential race. In America, you have all these down ballot races. You have the Congress gets re-elected. There's state elections. There's also a thing that I'd like to bring in, actually, which is local initiatives. So local laws that you can vote on in essentially local plebiscites on certain issues like boundary redistricting and dealing with taxes and all kinds of different things, which actually is a way in which we could look at America and improve our own system by lowering power down to the people on that local level.
We've got some comments about this actually, because it's a big story. So if we can bring them up and let's see what we can respond to here. Satnav again, Harris is a strong advocate for addressing climate change. She co-sponsored the Green New Deal resolution in the Senate and has emphasised the need for clean energy, environmental justice, etc. And I think that is a very good point. The GOP are one of the most radical organisations, probably the most radical organisation in the entire world. They are extremist and some even might say terrorist. Like they don't believe in climate change, which is essentially a death cult, if you ask me. Yeah. It's so important to support a corporate Democrat who, let's be honest, some corporate Democrats are pretty shitty on the environment. If Harris is half decent on it, that's still worth your support, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. If we're going to do it, we involve ourselves in these fights, not because we like the people necessarily, like Kamala Harris or whoever, or even Jeremy Corbyn in some respects, who's, had some policies I wasn't a massive fan of, but you do it because of harm reduction. You do it because the alternative is so much worse. And that's ultimately why I didn't support Keir Starmer, because I didn't see him as harm reduction, frankly. He was the same person, so there was no point.
For example, she co-sponsored the First Step Act, a bipartisan criminal justice reform bill and aimed at reducing recidivism and improving prison conditions. The bill passed with broad support from both. Yeah, I mean, there's material, tangible things that's better. Democrats and Republicans. Harris also collaborated with Republican senators on other issues, demonstrating her willingness to find common ground and address important issues in a bipartisan manner.
That's true, but can I just say it's really annoying? I mean, Biden. This is the ultimate failure of Bidenism. If we just put Gaza aside for a second, is that him constantly seeking to hold his hand across the aisle and try and get the Republicans on the side. Motherfucker, you were vice president when he tried to get the American Health Care Act through, and they savaged him. He tried to reach across the aisle and negotiate with these people. They can't be negotiated with. You might as well try and negotiate with a pit bull that's tearing your throat out. What are you doing?
I mean, I want to ask you about the GOP attacks. Right, we've had Sean Hannity, the American Ken doll. Oh, he's getting on a bit now, playing a compilation of her laughing. I mean, I don't understand. Are they trying to paint her as unserious? They've got
nothing. They've got nothing on her, right? Their attacks so far are: she's a lady, ha ha ha. Let's do some sexism. She's brown. I mean, literally, Nigel Farage called her a black African,
but she's half Jamaican and Indian.
Yeah,
she's not even African.
She's not even African.
Yeah.
So she's not even if they try and say, well, he was trying to say African American. A, speak properly then. And B, she's not African at all. Anyway, regardless. Yeah, so they're going to do some racism. And they're doing this weird thing where, look, yeah, she said she was wearing a blue suit. So just doing some cheeky ableism, because she was literally in front of some people who were visually impaired. So she was describing herself so that they could better picture the scene around them, because their eyes don't work perfectly. That's, like it's ridiculous. And they're going to try and paint her as unserious because she laughs. Like, motherfucker, you're supporting a rapist. I'm sorry, the fact that she laughs is not really of a concern to me. That's fine.
we've got a cop versus a felon.
Ironically, and that, but that's the
Ironically.
thing. We know from our recent election, vibes count, and for centrists, having a cop versus a felon is it's better to be the cop.
We've got 2 more comments. Let's go to the last 2. Sarah Jessica Farter again. I can't get over your name. I love it. Absolutely salute. She's pro-Israel. That's to be expected, but hopefully she can be anti-genocide in the immediate and narrow sense. Well, I mean, Kevin, you pointed out that she was one of the first people to... I mean, did she call for a ceasefire or, in America? Yeah. Did she call for a ceasefire or humanitarian pause?
I can't remember exactly, but she was certainly ahead of the curve. She certainly did it far before Biden did. And before most people outside of the kind of squad aligned people in American politics. I mean,
even the smallest support for Palestine is miles better than any Republican candidate. I mean, they are the AIPAC party, aren't they?
Literally, Donald Trump has basically said they aren't doing enough genocide.
I mean, he's extremely pro-Israel, even more than Biden, and that's quite a tough thing to do.
But even though he is literally legitimately anti-Semitic, by the way, if you look at some of the things he said in the past. Not the fake anti-Semitism that gets smeared against people who are, pro-Palestine, but actually literally like JQing type stuff. So there's just no comparison, frankly. She's not great on Israel, but he's a devil.
I mean, also, can you tell me anything about falling out a coconut tree? Please enlighten me. I mean, this is
this is the meme. It sounds vaguely racist when you're referring to.
It does, doesn't it? I would like clarification.
It's a thing. It comes from. It's a meme that she's a person who occasionally goes on these weird flights of fancy and starts saying odd things. And she I can't remember the exact analogy she was trying to draw, but she said something along the lines of she was trying to basically say get real to like this audience of people who were asking like silly questions. And she said, you think you just fell out of the coconut tree? Well, we've been here all this time or something. And it was such a weird thing because you just fell out of the coconut tree is not a saying that anyone has ever used before. She just like made this thing up. And so being coconut pilled is like the meme that's going around. And I think, and I hope she embraces it in the same way that Biden did with Dark Brandon, which was funny and kind of cute before the Gaza thing kicked off.
Oh no, I was fully on the Dark Brandon meme until he actually became the Dark Brandon on Gaza. But I think so. She's quite a memeable person, but they take the piss out of her though. Right.
Well, this is the thing. You can tell they're worried. You can tell they're worried because their freak out last night. Elon Musk was freaking out like hell on Twitter. Trump himself on Truth Social has been going crazy about this.
So why are they so worried about Kamala Harris? I mean, it is obviously easier to have Joe Biden, whose cognitive abilities aren't there. But Kamala Harris, one is in some polls doing worse than Biden. I don't know if she's particularly a good speaker.
She's a lot better, I think, than Biden. Not than Biden 5 years ago, but Biden now, right? I think she's doing worse in some of the polling because she's vice president. And to use the old adage that someone once used, there were 2 brothers. One went off to sea and one went to become vice president, and neither was heard of ever again. No one cares. The vice president is a nobody no one gives a shit about until they become president, like Joe Biden, right?
Also kind of got shafted, though, because I know a vice president gets the special area, and Biden gave borders to Kamala Harris, which is obviously going to come up in the election.
Yeah, true. So it's that probably wasn't helpful to her. But so I think she's more unknown, and as you pointed out in the article, she's only been around since 2017. So her national credentials or like her image isn't really there, and they've got a ridiculous sum of money to put adverts out there. They're literally running Kamala Harris adverts on YouTube now already. She's going to have plenty of face time for the next 3 months, and I expect those polls to flip a little bit. Now, again, even if they flip, that doesn't guarantee anything because of the inbuilt majority that Conservatives have because the Electoral College being as skewed as it is. But I expect her to probably win, and that's the point. They're scared because they thought they had an absolute shoo-in. If Joe Biden was the candidate, they knew they were going to win because he wasn't going to get more mentally sharp in the next 3 months. And they were going to have debates where he was going to have the same sort of problems. Because even at his sharpest, he's not great now anymore. And that's why Trump's come out and is now potentially saying that he doesn't want to debate Kamala. Because he realizes his got so many issues that she's going to be able to pick up on because he's such a soiled
remember,
goods
he's
at this point.
not mentally sharp either, and that's something that gets forgetting a lot because he's loud
did you
and
see
brash.
his speech at the RNC? It was an hour and a half of rambling madness. He said that 107% of jobs had gone to migrants. What the fuck does that mean? Like he's porridge for brains as well. And they've set up this entire narrative that an old man shouldn't be president, and now you've got a 50-year-old woman up against this mentally
the oldest
dilapidated
presidential candidate ever, by the way, Trump.
Yeah, oldest presidential candidate ever, who again isn't getting any sharper with age. So they are scared because ultimately she can win in a way that Biden could not. They've spent all this time attacking Biden, and he's taken all of that flack. And he's basically been used, ironically, I suppose, given his support for Israel, as a human shield.
A human shield. A genius move, accidentally, from Biden there. Because I also note as well, which is really funny, that Trump said, and he kind of exposed his weakness by saying, we spent all this damn money attacking Biden, and now we have to start again.
Exactly, because they've spent a lot of their money. They don't have that much money. The PACs
well, they've got $45 million every single month from Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, they've got PAC money. But that's far less easy to spend in terms of advertisements. The actual amount of money that he has to control isn't that much, and he bilks his audience, right? A lot of that goes into paying for his legal funds. If you're giving money, literally, they have to put the legal disclaimer on it, and it says that a minimum of 1 cent out of every dollar will be spent on the campaign, which also means a maximum of 1 cent on the dollar will be spent on the campaign. Exactly. The rest of it's going to pay for his immense legal fees, because he's not just being sued in New York; he's being sued left, right, and center all over the place because he's one of the most profoundly and obviously corrupt human beings who's ever run for that office, and that is saying something.
There's good competition for him, but I think he comes head and shoulders above the rest.
He really is.
The next 2-3 months are going to be very interesting.
They are.
But that is all for tonight. We've actually overran, but that's not always a problem. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. I'd like to thank Kevin for gracing me again. I'll say it again. You graced me with your presence tonight. It's always a pleasure.
Look, the pleasure was entirely mine.
Now, make sure you subscribe to Kevin's channel and follow him on Twitch, but I put the link in the description. You can also support Turn Left by hitting the subscribe button. And if you like our work and you want us to become full-time, then you can support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 per month, or any one-off donation by going to patreon.com/turnleftmedia. We will be back this Friday at the same time of 7:30 p.m. My name's Curtis Daly. Thank you and see you next time.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn Left.